as you're able, please open your personal copies of the scriptures. We're going to be reading in Romans chapter 10, New Living Translation. Romans chapter 10. Dear brothers and sisters, the longing of my heart and my prayer to God is for the people of Israel to be saved. I know what enthusiasm they have for God, but it is misdirected zeal. For they don't understand God's way of making people right with himself. Refusing to accept God's way, they cling to their own way of getting right with God by trying to keep the law. For Christ has already accomplished the purpose for which the law was given. As a result, all who believe in him are made right with God. For Moses writes that the law's way of making a person right with God requires obedience to all of its commands. But faith's way of getting right with God says, don't say in your heart, who will go up to heaven to bring Christ down to earth? And don't say, who will go down to the place of the dead to bring Christ back to life again? In fact, it says, the message is very close at hand. It is on your lips and in your heart. And that message is the very message about faith that we preach. If you openly declare that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is by believing in your heart that you are made right with God, and it is by openly declaring your faith that you are saved. As the scriptures tell us, anyone who trusts in him will never be disgraced. Jew and Gentiles are the same in this respect. They have the same Lord who gives generously to all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. But how can they call on him to save them unless they believe in him? And how can they believe in him if they have never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? And how will anyone go and tell them without being sent? That is why the scriptures say, how beautiful are the feet of messengers who bring good news. But not everyone welcomes good news. But not everyone welcomes the good news. For Isaiah the prophet said, Lord, who has believed our message? So by faith comes from hearing, that is, hearing the good news about Christ. But I ask, have the people of Israel actually heard the message? Yes, they have. The message has gone throughout the earth and the words to all the world. But I ask, did the people of Israel really understand? Yes, they did. For even in the time of Moses, God said, I will rouse your jealousy through the people who are not even a nation. I will provoke your anger through the foolish Gentiles. And later, Isaiah spoke boldly for God, saying, I was found by people who were not looking for me. I showed myself to those who were not asking for me. But regarding Israel, God said, all day long I opened my arms to them, but they were disobedient and rebellious. This concludes the reading of God's word. Please be seated.
Thank you, Paul. Well, good morning, everybody. How are we doing? Woo, yes. My name is Dylan. So grateful to be here and opening God's Word with you this morning. Jumping into Romans chapter 10. We've been in Romans 9 the last couple of weeks. But yeah, Romans 10 this week, Romans 11 next week. Here to start, I believe something that's true for all of us, something that we all love to do, is share good news with other people. Just think about something that you've shared, like good news with somebody, and just like the reaction that you get from them, or somebody sharing good news with you, and the reaction that they get from you. Like, we all do this. We do this with like our TV shows. It's like, man, have you seen this TV show yet? Like, you have to watch this. If you haven't watched it, it is so good. Or here's this song that I've been listening to. I want to share with you. It is so good. Or check out this podcast. It is so good. Like, you have to listen to it. We love to like share the things that are good with other people. We do this with graduation announcements. Like my fridge is full of them right now, of seniors graduating and full of, like, here's the good news, here's where I'm going. We want to celebrate that. We should celebrate news about getting engaged or expecting a new child or getting our dream job. Like, it is just a natural thing that when there are good things that happen, we want to share it with other people. There's something that wells up within us that makes us have to share good news with other people. And as followers of Jesus, we have something that is so good. We have news that is so good that we can't keep it to just ourselves. And we are the messengers of the greatest news that the world has ever heard. This is just such a huge point of what we've talked about in Romans and what I think we're going to talk, what Paul is saying in our passage today. Just like it has been in Romans chapter 9, Paul opens Romans 10 here, and his heart is still breaking for Israel, his brothers and sisters of the Jewish heritage, in their refusal to grasp the good news about Jesus. His heart is breaking for them. And this is why he starts in verse 1. He says, "My heart and my prayer to God is for the people of Israel to be saved." My heart and prayer is for the people of Israel to be saved. These first 4 verses, what we hear in Paul's, like the language he's using here, he's not condemning Israel for their refusal, but he has such a deep compassion for them. He's saying for his fellow brothers, Jewish brothers and sisters who haven't submitted to Jesus, that even though they're enthusiastic and that they're so sincere in what they're doing, their zeal is still misdirected. And he has such deep compassion for that, because that was Paul's story. Paul's exact story was the very same thing. He was so zealous in sticking to the law and actually being an opponent to the Christian faith until he met Jesus. Because of this, he has compassion for them. This passage reminds us that it is fully possible to be enthusiastic and zealous about something and then still totally be wrong about it. For Israel, their zeal was misdirected because they totally missed Jesus. And they didn't realize that Jesus, who is the stumbling stone that they kept tripping over, was actually the rock that they were supposed to build their life upon. And as a result, they've missed the righteousness of God and instead are still living in this lifestyle of trying to earn their way and fulfilling the law in order to earn their righteousness. And they kept missing this good news. And Paul is doing all that he can to help them see how they're missing this. Stop clinging to your own way. Stop trying to make yourself right with God. You have no power or ability to do that yourself. Verse 4, he says, there is good news. Jesus has accomplished the purpose of the law, and now you can be made right with God simply by believing in Jesus. And Jesus has made a way for us to be made right with God and to know him, and it has nothing to do with what we can do to earn it. I think a good question to ask is, are there ways that we are trying to cling to our own righteousness? We may not be outright rejecting Jesus altogether, but are there other things that we are putting our hope in, our trust in, that aren't Jesus? Are there ways that we're trying to cling to our own righteousness? It can be so easy to fall into the trap of thinking, man, what I do says so much about who I actually am, or what I have, or what I possess, or the things that I can do. Hopefully that will make God accept me a little bit more. Or am I doing enough? Am I being good enough? Am I a moral person enough? Am I a good enough spouse? Am I a good enough dad? If I can just be good enough or do enough or have enough, and hopefully I can build up a good enough resume that God will say, you're good to go. I accept you, you've done enough. But Paul tells us we have been freed from this. This is not how God works. This is not how God operates. And it's all about the way of faith through what Jesus has done for us. Because of Jesus, this fear this is a fear of like needing to do enough or be good enough. It is something that we don't need to be consumed by. And this is what Paul, he touches on this when he turns to the next verses here. And I'm going to jump into verse number 6. But faith's way of getting right with God says, don't say in your heart, who will go up to heaven to bring Christ down to earth? Or don't say, who will go down to the place of the dead to bring Christ back to life again? In fact, it says the message is very close at hand. It is in your hearts, or on your lips and in your hearts. The way of faith. Faith's way, this is how Paul says it, faith's way of getting right with God is so different than any sort of works-based righteousness. And Paul explains this. He does a lot of quoting from the Old Testament in this passage, and I wish that we could dig into all of that, but we can't this morning. But here he's quoting from Deuteronomy, and he's also using some common phrases from his day that were meant to express things that were impossible. He's saying, you don't have to go searching the heights of the heavens to find righteousness. You don't have to go across the sea. You don't have to search the depths of the ocean to find salvation. Who could do that? Nobody can do that except for Jesus. And the good news is that Jesus has done all that we need. He did come down to earth. He fulfilled the law through his perfect life. He died and he rose again. And because of this, there is no striving that we need to do on our part. It is already done, and all we do is believe in what he has done for us. The message is very close and at hand. It is on your lips and in your heart. And this message is the message of faith in Jesus. There is no striving. There is no guessing if we've done enough or if we are good enough. It is just trusting and receiving what Jesus has done for us. Why would God accept us? It's certainly not for anything that we have done, but it is only because of what Jesus has done. And that is good news. This message is so good and it's so simple. And what makes it even greater is that it's for anyone and everyone to receive. And this is what Paul turns to in verses 9 through 13. Paul says, if we openly declare that Jesus is Lord and we believe in our hearts that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. And this is it. Trust and believe, or believe and declare, trust and proclaim. It's important, though, that we say that these two things are not two different actions. It's not saying that you have to believe first and then confess, and if you just check both of those things off, you're good to go. That's not what he's saying. He's saying that the belief is this genuine trust with all of who we are, a genuine belief and trust in who Jesus is. With all of myself, to the core of who I am, I'm trusting in Jesus. And it's the strength of this inner conviction that makes naturally overflow my declaration, my confession, my profession that Jesus is Lord. So the belief that is already there within me is naturally going to come out in the way that I live, in the words that I say. For it's by believing in your heart that you were made right with God and openly declaring your faith that you are saved. This is simple and it's so beautiful because it's open for everyone. God's heart has always been for all people, every nation, tribe, language, tongue, to know him, to be in relationship with him, to be saved. And we see this in God's promise to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. From the beginning, God's like, Abraham, go. I've got something that I'm going to start through you. And he says, all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you. You can go through the Old Testament and track this story, but God's fulfilling, the fulfillment of God's promise of what he was going to do through Abraham is ultimately fulfilled in and through Jesus. All of the nations now are able to be blessed to receive salvation because of what Jesus has done. And unlike Israel, Paul came to understand this and know this. And he says it so emphatically here in these verses. Anyone who trusts in him will never be disgraced. God gives generously to all who call on him, and everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. This message is so close, it is so simple, it is so good, and it is meant for all people. And because of this, it's something that we can't keep to ourselves. If we have this, we cannot keep this to ourselves. And this news is something that God invites us and calls us to share with everyone, because everyone is invited. But as Paul is he's gonna turn his attention now and start to ask the question, but everybody's invited, but how are they going to know? If everybody is invited, who is going to tell them? And this is what he ultimately gets to in verses 14 and 15. Paul says, but how can they call on him to save them unless they believe in him? And how can they believe if they've never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? And how will anyone go and tell them without being sent? That is why the scriptures say, how beautiful are the feet of messengers who bring the good news. Who is it that told you about Jesus? Maybe when you were young, it was your parents or a Sunday school teacher, or it was a coach or a friend in college. Maybe for some of us, we needed all of these people to tell us about Jesus before we got it. But whoever it was, the fact is, before we could call out to Jesus, someone had to first tell us about Jesus. Paul's questions here in verses 14 and 15 show us this progression. He starts at the end. Everybody and anyone can call on the name of the Lord to be saved. But before they can call, they have to believe. And before they believe, they have to hear about Jesus. And before they can hear, someone has to tell them. And in order for someone to tell them, those people have to first be sent out as ones carrying the beautiful message of the good news. As followers of Jesus, what is true of all of us is that we are all messengers who carry the beautiful message of the good news of Jesus. We are all sent out with the mission of helping people find and follow Jesus. There's so much that we could spend more time on in this passage. There's a lot of verses and a lot of things we could pull out, but this is the thing that I want to sit in for most of our time this morning. What does it mean to be sent to tell? What does it mean to be sent to tell, and how do we do this? So once we receive the good news, we become bearer of the good news. What we have in the good news is something that's so precious, that is so valuable, that we can't hold it in. We can't keep it just to ourselves. And just as it's natural to want to share the things in our lives that are good, that are worth celebrating, that are important to us, the natural response to having the good news should be to share it with other people. We bear it, we are gripped by it, and we are compelled to share it with other people. We are sent to share what we've been given. And again, this is not a new form of legalism or a new rule that we have to follow, something that's like we're obligated to do to now make our faith something that is legitimate. The point of sharing is not obligation, but is a genuine desire to point other people to the source of life that we have. Like a river that we have found in a desert, or shelter in the storm, life and peace in a world that is full of chaos and confusion. This is the inner belief that's going to lead to an outer confession that Paul referenced just a few verses ago. The faith that I have in Jesus cannot stay within. It's like a fountain that's always bubbling over and overflowing. And what's captivated our hearts is naturally going to overflow out of us and into the lives of others. This is not a work, but it is just a natural response of faith in Jesus. I think a lot of times when we talk about this idea of being sent, there are friends that I've been talking to recently who I mean, just like last week, we're saying this, like, man, this is a fear that I have. Like, when I think about being sent, I think it means that I've got to sell all of my stuff, and I've got to go to some remote village in some remote country, and that's what it means to be sent. It's somewhere far away from here. Or if it's not that, then it means that, man, I've got to become an evangelist, and I've got to stand on street corners, and I've got to yell at people. And it's like, that doesn't feel good. Like, I don't want to do that. And I don't think that that's what Paul is talking about here. Have we thought about how we can be sent right here where we are already planted? What if this is where God has already sent us to? It's not to say that we won't move or we won't be sent somewhere else, but for this time and this season, what if Charlotte or Matthews or Mint Hill or Stallings or Indian Trail, wherever it might be, what if this is exactly where God has sent us in this time in history to tell others about Jesus? Scripture talks about how we are all divinely placed where we are in this moment, in this place in history, in the world. And what if this is where God has placed us to witness to people only we can reach? Being sent doesn't mean that we have to go far. We don't have to drop everything and move across the world. Maybe being sent means being sent across town. Maybe it means going across your streets. Maybe it means going across your own living room, across the dinner table. And this is going to sound like a shameless plug, but I mean this so sincerely. Maybe it means going across the wall and serving in Next Gen. Because we have kids over there who don't know Jesus. And we need people like us to faithfully go and talk about Jesus and point them to him. This is how we are sent. We aren't just sent, but we are sent with the message, and we are sent to tell. A question, as I've been working through this week and doing my study, a question that's been really convicting for me has been, do I live like the good news is good enough to share? Do I live like the good news is good enough to share? It's so easy for me to just get so stuck and caught up in the life and times of Dylan, and it's like I really lose perspective on what is important and what I should be doing. But if I just take a moment to step back from the smallness of my own world and look from the perspective of eternity, what we prioritize here and now really starts to look a lot different. And thinking this way also puts into perspective things like my own fears and worries that I have when I think about, man, should I tell other people, or like, should I talk to this person about Jesus? The person who cuts my hair, like, I see her every month. And like, maybe I should talk to her about Jesus. But it's like, oh, would that make things weird? I don't know. Like, what if somebody like her, or just anybody, what if somebody asks a question that I don't know how to answer? Or what if somebody asks a question that I struggle with myself? Or what if I say something that's going to actually push somebody away from Jesus? Like, I don't want to do that. What if they're to reject me? Or what if me talking to them about Jesus changes our relationship going forward? That feels risky. And it's easier just to not do it. What if? That's when you think for a moment the story of Peter walking on the water. Jesus calls him out onto the water, and Peter steps out, and he's looking at him, but then he starts to see everything happening around him, the wind and the waves. I think our what-ifs so easily become like the storm on the sea. They cause us to turn our eyes away from Jesus, and we start to look at the wind and the waves of our worry and our fear, and it starts to pull us away from Jesus and back down into the water. But when Jesus calls us to step out of the boat in faith and to do things that feel risky or feel difficult, he's really asking us just to keep our eyes focused on him. Don't lose sight of me. I'm right here with you. I'm not calling you to go somewhere that I am not already at. When it comes to sharing Jesus with others, we can step out of the boat with freedom and with confidence and trust that even though there are what ifs everywhere, and it might feel risky, we can take courage that our only responsibility is to keep our eyes faithfully fixed on Jesus and just to tell others about him. Hebrews 12:2 says, we are to fix our eyes on Jesus, who is the author and the perfecter of our faith. I think this is such a good reminder about who is the one who's in charge of changing the hearts of people. It is Jesus. It is not us. It is not our job to seal the deal. It's not our job to save. It's not our job to win someone over with an argument. Jesus is the one who's the author and the perfecter of our story and everybody else's story. And because of this, we can freely let go of the pressure to have all of the answers, or to feel like we have it all figured out, or have to say things perfectly, or have to be the reason why somebody chooses to follow Jesus. Amidst the wind and the waves, all we do is just to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus. And we tell others about him. This is what it's all about. A question I want to ask is, what is it about Jesus that captivated you? What captivated your heart about Jesus? What is it that drew you to him? How did he draw you to himself? There's a lot of stories in scriptures that I think that we can work through in this, but a couple that came to mind is like the woman at the well in John chapter 4. She has this encounter with Jesus, and she ends up leaving there, going back to her town and saying, let me tell you about the one who told me everything that I ever did, but he didn't reject me. Or the blind man from John chapter 9, he was born blind. Jesus heals him, and then he gets peppered with all of these questions. How did this happen? Who did this? What was going on? And he's just like, man, I don't know. But what I do know is I once was blind, but now I see. And what if sharing Jesus with others was as simple as that? What if sharing Jesus was, we could feel the freedom to say, man, I don't have it all figured out. I don't know all the answers, but let me tell you what I do know. I don't have all the answers, but let me tell you about the one who took away my guilt and my shame. Let me tell you about the one who freed me from my addiction. Let me tell you how Jesus gave me a new identity that's rooted in his love and has freed me from needing to be loved and accepted and earn other people's approval. Let me tell you about how Jesus gives me peace for my fear and my anxiety. Let me tell you about the joy and the hope that I have in life now that I've never had before. There's so much freedom to say, I don't have all the answers. I don't know everything, but let me tell you what I do know. This is how Jesus changed my life. I have tasted and I have seen that the Lord is good, and I'm here to tell you that. It's okay to say I'm not perfect, I don't have it all figured out, but what I do know is that Jesus is loving, and he's kind, and he's gracious, and he invites everyone to know this kind of life that comes from him alone. And I want you to have that. Bearing witness simply means to tell the goodness of God in your life. To tell the good news is to share the beauty of the joy and the love and the peace and the life that we have found that comes from Jesus. And our role is to not have perfect answers to every question or objection, but just to be faithful witnesses, to fix our eyes on Jesus and to tell others about him. How beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. As followers of Jesus, we are messengers sent out carrying a beautiful message of the life that Jesus wants everybody to know. And as we carry this is how Paul ends this in chapter 10. As we carry this, we must know, though, that there is sad news that the scripture makes us aware of. And Paul ends and he says, in these verses, not everyone will welcome the good news. Not everybody is going to welcome the good news. This is certainly true of Israel, and it's true for us today. Israel has heard and they've understood, and they still don't welcome the good news. In the same way, people that we know will hear the good news today. People that we've told about Jesus, or people that we long to know Jesus, they've heard it, they've understood it, but they haven't accepted it yet. And this is difficult because we all have loved ones that come to mind when we talk about this, who haven't accepted the gospel. But when we're struggling with this, I think there are a couple of things that are helpful to keep in mind. A couple of things to keep in mind and to keep our eyes on this that will help us to hold on to hope. Because with God, the story is never over. With God, the story is never over. So, first thing, we have to remember, just like we were talking about, we have to remember that Jesus is the one who's the author and the perfecter of our faith, and everybody else is not us. So the pressure is off, and we can trust, just as God has done a work in us and is still doing a work in us, that in his way and his time that he is doing a work in the people that we love. And second, we have to remember, this is what chapter 9 was talking about, Romans 9. God's ways are so much bigger and so much more than what we can understand. We cannot fully wrap our arms around the magnitude of God, the majesty of God, the mystery of God. We cannot fully fathom that, or his timing or his ways. But we have to trust that he is good and he is merciful. Chapter 9 is so clear about that. God is merciful, has made salvation possible. And Romans chapter 10 says that everybody is welcome. And so we have to hold those things in tension and trust God's good heart and his salvation that is open for all people. I've been in student ministry for several years, and there's one student that I met. This was like my second year. I interned 2 summers two summers I interned in college. In the second summer, I met this guy. He was graduating and going off to college, and I graduated college and was getting married and moving to Charlotte. But we met, and we spent a lot of time together. And this guy, he grew up going to church, and he knew the stories, and he had heard the gospel. But it was clear that he hadn't accepted it. And I just spent a lot of time with him. And a few of his buddies who were in the youth group, and there were several other leaders who were like, man, we want to invest in him, and we want him to know Jesus, and we're loving him, and we're telling him. He's asking all of these questions, and but he goes off to college, and it's like he still hasn't accepted. And then we kind of lose touch with him. And then here and there we hear like, man, he's living a life. It's like he still hasn't accepted. And it's hard to know that there are people who know the truth but haven't yet accepted it. It's a difficult reality that we walk in. But remember, with God, the story is never over. It is never over. So just a few months ago, I get a text from him. And it's been years since we've talked. But he said, hey, I want you to know that I put my faith in Jesus, and I'm getting baptized in 2 weeks. And I just want to say thank you for the influence that you had on my life. We really just hung out for 1 summer. But it was such a beautiful, it was just an incredible encouragement for me to hear that. And a beautiful reminder that God is never done working. And sometimes, the people that we love, the people that we're telling about Jesus, sometimes we might get a text. They might tell us, they might let us know, hey, you made a difference, like it worked. I think a lot of times, though, we're not going to get a text. We have no idea the way that God is going to use us, the impact that we have. And this is back to, the pressure is so off of us. And so the way that we share Jesus with others, tell others about the goodness of Jesus, it takes the pressure off of us to have to seal the deal or to know, man, this is working because, man, God is working all things together, and he is writing a story. He is the author and the perfecter of faith. And all we need to do is just be faithful to tell others about Jesus and trust that he is writing the story. So to close this morning, I think there are a couple of things to think about and reflect on as ways to apply all of this. But the first, I just want us to reflect on, where has God sent you? Where has God sent you, and who can you tell? Where are there places that God has brought you to? What are the environments that you are in? Who are the people that are just naturally around you day in and day out, at home or where you work, where we live and work and play? Like who is just around us? When thinking about who we can tell, who we can tell Jesus about is where am I just naturally rubbing shoulders with people? You know, who are the people God has placed around me? Second thing I think is just the way that this passage began. Romans 10 verse 1, Paul says that the longing of my heart and my prayer to God is for Israel to be saved. And I wonder, how could we make this our own prayer? How can we make this our own? The longing of my heart and my prayer to God is for my brother to be saved, my son to be saved, the person who cuts my hair, the guy that I work with that is really struggling. My heart is for them to know the life that's found in Jesus. And if you know who this is, then man, awesome. Keep praying for them, praying for those people. And whenever you have the opportunity to love them and to tell them about Jesus, man, take it. But if you don't know, that is totally fine. But I want to challenge you and say, man, make this your prayer. God, who might this be for me? Who might you want my heart to break for? Who does your heart break for in my circle that I need to be aware of? God, would you grow my care and my concern and love for those around me who don't yet know you? And third, finally, I think the call here is, man, let's just keep together, let us keep our eyes fixed on Jesus. Keep our eyes fixed on Jesus and be resolved to tell others about him. Because by fixing our eyes on him, we stay focused on him and remember who he is and what he's done for us. We can keep our message simple and beautiful and just think about, man, these are the things that are lovely and beautiful that draw me to Jesus. And I just want other people to know that. What if we really lived as ones sent out with the beautiful message? What if we believed that the message we have, that we carry with us, is too good to hold for ourselves? Our bottom line for this morning is we have been sent to help people find and follow Jesus. To God be the glory today. Let's pray. God, I pray that you would do this work in us of making the message of your good news so precious and so beautiful that we can't help but contain it. And Lord, that you would help us to see that we live lives on mission to tell other people about you, about your goodness and about your love and about your mercy. I pray that you would help empower us to do that. Would you help us to have eyes to see those who are around us who don't yet know you? And would you give us the courage to step out of the boat, to stay focused on you, have our eyes fixed on you, and then faithfully tell them about who you are. We love you, Lord. We pray all of this